I wanted to make this video about all of my testing that I have done over the years, because when I start working with people, I try to let them know that this isn't going to be a linear process. The testing is not going to just improve, improve, improve. We're going to be peeling back a lot of layers, and oftentimes it's going to be up, down, backwards, better, worse for the next couple years. But despite it looking all over the place, you will start to feel better. Now, there's quite a few reasons for this. For one, when we are detoxing, we're usually moving toxins out of their hiding spot. So that could be adipose tissue. Heavy metals, for example, can be in the liver, the kidneys, the brain, the bone. We can be moving out chemicals from some of these types of tissues as well. And a lot of toxins get stored in fat because a lot of them are fat soluble. And so when we start to mobilize things, it can be almost like kicking a bee's nest, right? So in the beginning, we're going to be doing a lot of seemingly things that might feel easy, like supporting our cellular functioning, replenishing with nutrition, getting outside, being exposed to light. And all of that is really important to get it set up for when we do start to mobilize some of the toxins out of tissue, out of the receptor sites they've stolen through ionic mimicry, out of our adipose tissue. But we need nutrition, we need nutrients to be able to power the detox pathways, the enzymes, to support just cellular functioning in general and energy metabolism, the whole electron transport chain. All of that is important to be done first before we start to move toxicity out. So that process can be shorter for some people, much longer for others. But I just wanted to show you some examples so you know not to freak out when your subsequent testing looks worse than the first one you did. So the first thing I am going to show is going to be my bioenergetic scan. So let me pull these up. Now, I started doing these scans in, I believe, the very end of 2019. Actually, no, yeah. Well, I sent it in, but it wasn't ready until January of 2020. So this is when I was still being exposed to mold. My boyfriend lived at his old apartment still, which is where the mold was. And when I met him is when I got exposed. So this is when I had rashes all over my entire body. You can see a lot of the stress is in the HPA axis, my gut, kidney, and liver, which I had also had hepatitis A in the beginning of 2018. And also molds can actually damage the liver and the kidney. I have had asthma since I was a little kid, so no surprise that the lungs resonated here. And then molds was on the environmental list as a sensitivity. We have low stomach acid, which is a big theme for me through all the testing that I have done. And then you can see I resonated with quite a few different toxins. We didn't have the list on here. The molds that I resonated with, that I was exposed to, was considered a mycoestrogen. So it was no surprise that estrogen was high on my scan. And then, of course, I did all of these remedies. After that, I did a few remedy scans, which is just going to be a list of a list of supportive remedies. Then I did a balancing scan, which is a little shorter, but also is going to show, the remedies and the toxins that were resonating. And then I did an awareness scan at the end of September, which if you have not done one yet, you really should, because it's very much so resonates with, or shows the resonating emotional behavioral patterns that are coming up for you. And then also with the awareness scan, you can have a personalized infused remedy that's going to be infused with all of the balancing frequencies of the nutrients, of the oils, of the gem, of the color, and the balancing emotional patterns as well. This was just a remedy scan. another balancing scan. So I didn't start doing a lot of full scans until 2021. So this was actually when I was at my most sick. I was in topical steroid withdrawal. So you may be wondering, why does it look so good? Well, at this time, I was on a lot of medications. I was doing antihistamines, and I was also doing Xanax, and I was on a ton of supplements that I could not stop because I was, so miserable. So I think that that's why it came up as not looking so bad, because all of the medications I was on was masking a lot. For example, around this time is when I had eosinophils at a 28, and eosinophils are white blood cells that help to kill parasites and handle allergens. And so that's very, very high. They above a 3 usually is an indicator of parasites or active allergic reactions, mast cell degranulation. And so 28 was super duper high. You can see, then they didn't list the toxins on this one either. Still have that high estrogen on there. The next scan that I did, another awareness scan, another full scan, again, looking pretty good, but I was still in topical steroid withdrawal here. And what I like to tell my clients is that oftentimes the scan is also, I was still on medications here, but the scan is prioritizing where the focus absolutely needs to be. What is the true priority for you right now? And it may look better than you feel, or it may look worse than you feel, but it's always going to lead you in the right direction. So looking at some of the things that came up, no surprise. Going into 22, I was actually starting to feel much better here, and you can see it actually looks way worse than any of my previous scans. I was coming out of topical steroid withdrawal, my skin was getting better. However, I was starting to have a lot of pain in my body. There was still a lot of inflammation. We still have a lot of areas of stress. Here is when we actually started to list the toxins on the scan for practitioners, so you can see like exactly what I was resonating with. We always have these sex hormones coming up as low. Then going into September, starting to look a little better. I'm feeling a little bit better. Looking at some of the toxins still coming up though. I almost always resonated with parasites and molds on every single one. December of 2022, looking a lot better. We've got that HPA access coming up for me still, which is a big theme. And Candida seems to be a big theme for me as well. We're starting to finally see some heavy metals. I was doing some deep mineral balancing here. You can see that the heavy metals were not coming up before until I started doing the mineral balancing. Here I had a scan that was all in the blue, and I was very happy about this because I was finally actually feeling pretty good. Again, that HPA access, Miss Amanda and her adrenals. And you can see still actually we've got some heavy metals still coming out, which is great because again, I was heavily doing mineral balancing here. Candida still coming up because I'm still having skin rashes at this point. And then finally, we make it to February 28th, so just recently. Interesting, the stomach is coming up for me this time because I am one of those people that doesn't really ever have the stomach symptoms. Like I don't have an upset stomach. I never have changes in bowel movements or anything like that. But obviously with skin health, that can play a really big role, and resonating with some bacteria overgrowth. And we're still seeing heavy metals coming up on here as well. And then here's where we also started to add the emotional blocks. So shame for sure, big one. And a lot of my techniques that I do and working with my own mentors and coaches, the shame and guilt for how crappy I treated my body is a big theme for me. I was using drugs and alcohol and partying and not sleeping for over a decade. Emptiness is always something that I've kind of struggled with, that numb feeling. I'll talk about the calcium shell here in a minute, but that is one of the big symptoms of the calcification process in the body from chronic stress. So I talked about the HPA axis coming up a lot for me on the scan, which is that chronic stress response. And then ambition. So why would ambition be an emotional block, right? Well, when you are constantly trying to prove your worth or prove that you are good enough, and you're constantly trying to take on more than you need or take on more than you can handle, chronically burning out that HPA axis, trying to overachieve, very ambitious. Drive comes from this, but also you run the risk of that burnout, which is a big theme in my life too. So definitely makes a lot of sense. So now let's look at my HTMA. Now we're not going to look at all of them. Let's see if I have my very first one. I don't think I do. Well, let's go back to... All right, so this was about May of last year. And I bring this one up because it's the first one that popped up, but 2023, 2023, 2023. Yeah, so let's just do the recent ones. So the very first one that I ever did was in 2015, and I had calcium at about almost 600. I think it was like 577. And so I was in this massive calcium shell pattern. Now this is 2015, before I got sick. 2018 was when I had hepatitis A, really traumatic, unstable 2 years of my life. A lot of shame, a lot of guilt, a lot of lack of alignment, a lot of shutting down who I truly was, pretending, and just really not taking care of myself in any way, shape, or form, realizing that I had a lot of trauma patterns that I was reliving over and over again. And I was sabotaging myself, and I was sabotaging my relationships, and I was never going to be at my best the way that I was living. And so 2015 was when I was in this calcium shell. I didn't do another HTMA until many years later, until 2021, when I was in topical steroid withdrawal. But 3 years before I actually truly got sick, there was this numbness, there was this calcification trauma pattern already going on underneath the surface. And I was numb, I was not feeling like myself, things didn't make me happy, but I wasn't really sad. I just had this existential depression that I was just kind of going through the motions of life, is kind of how I describe it. And I was still heavily drinking and still using drugs at the time. It was right after a really traumatic breakup where I just felt like, why care anymore? You know, like, why even try to have a good relationship when they just end so horrifically? And so after that, when I was in topical steroid withdrawal, I was thinking, you know what? I remember that test having a lot of insight to your adrenal health and your stress patterns. And in topical steroid withdrawal, I was having horrible, horrible all day long heart palpitations, just racing heart to the point where I almost went to the hospital several times. Finally, I found someone who did frequency specific microcurrent, and I went every week and got hooked up to these electrodes from these machines that were like $20,000 each, and they stimulated the vagus nerve to slow down my heart rate. And luckily that worked, because otherwise I would have had to go to the hospital at some point and probably gotten put on propranolol. So when I finally found the HTMA again, I've been retracing through all these really intense stress patterns. And on my bioenergetic scans, you can see that, you know, the HPA axis is always coming up. Fungal overgrowth is always coming up. Parasites is always coming up. And I remembered on that first HTMA in 2015 that she said with that calcium shell, you also have really significant copper toxicity. And that copper toxicity is contributing to your yeast overgrowth, your mold sensitivity. She didn't mention parasites back then. They were not as big of a topic. Actually, I don't think anyone was talking about parasites in 2015. But she was basically like, you have really bad copper toxicity. Since you are a vegetarian, you need to start eating meat right now or it's going to get worse. And I actually just found my original test, so I'd like to share that with you. It's a picture. It's pretty grainy, so sorry, but you can see calcium 557, really high, magnesium as well in that magnesium shell. We've got copper toxicity right here, and then we also have really high selenium. I am assuming because my mercury is an incredibly high and selenium is antagonistic to mercury. And then we've also got really high aluminum and nickel too. Oh. And so back to my HTMA, I just want to show you guys that it's totally normal to go in and out of all sorts of different patterns. You're not going to just do a couple and that's going to be it. This is a long-term commitment to retrace through all of the years of your life to get to a point where you actually feel good. Your testing might not even look good, but throughout this retracing is what they call it, you will start to eventually feel better. But the test gives you an idea of what nutrients you are needing at that time. And we're supporting whatever the body needs at that time, depending on the oxidation rate, etc. And eventually what that leads to is this elimination of these heavy metals that have gotten into your enzymes, have gotten into your cells and stolen the receptor sites of heavy metals through the process of ionic mimicry. And then you've got these low functioning enzymes, like the enzymes needed for detox the metals, the enzymes needed to detox mold. With copper toxicity is going to come that chronic fungal overgrowth, candida, as well as difficulty fighting off parasites. And with low zinc, for example, low stomach acid came up on all of my scans. Now, the remedies that have come up on the scan often will very much so match what the body is asking for on HTMA. I won't show you specific, but it's eerily similar sometimes. I've worked with a lot of clients who have a hard time with the HTMA supplement, so we will only use bioenergetics and we may tweak the regimen a little bit, but their HTMA does change and improve when we use the other remedies, because all of the remedies used for HTMA are also tested for using bioenergetics or something very similar is in the formulary. So here, starting with May of last year, I'm in the 4 highs pattern. This is a slow oxidizer in an acute stress. I'm typically a slower oxidizer. Then in August, I'm just back into this slow oxidation, which is typically where I feel better. So coming out of that 4 highs, I was like, oh, I feel a lot better, but I'm still in this calcium shell. It did go down a little bit, you can see, so that's good. Then looking at Halloween of last year, back into that 4 highs pattern, did not feel very good. I had just finished launching 2 back-to-back group programs. I was really proud of it, but boy, did I really work a lot through the weekends, on my days off, just to get those programs out there and to run them. So I wasn't surprised that I was kind of back in this pattern. So also I'd like to point out that it doesn't necessarily only have to do with the supplements you're taking. Your stress and your life is going to affect these much, much more than just the supplements you're taking. So you may notice in this one, I'm in a what's called a lifestyle stress pattern. The calcium to magnesium ratio normally looks at blood sugar. However, anything above a 13.5 and it's a little over is what they call lifestyle stress pattern or a spiritual defensiveness pattern. And when I overwork like this with that ambitious emotional block, um, is when I can tell that I'm out of alignment with, what I truly feel like my body actually needs. And then coming into December, I did this one really close. So it was only a couple weeks. I think I waited like 5 weeks, like not even 2 whole months to do it. And I was already in fast oxidation. And this didn't feel so good either. But this was a kind of a newer pattern. This is not one that I think I've only been in fast oxidation twice in the last 2.5 years, but it is totally normal to ebb and flow. And this is a good sign. This is a sign that you are retracing some of these old patterns. And what that means is we're peeling back the layers. So with bioenergetics, they use the onion analogy, getting closer and closer to the root. But for me, I like the analogy of a painting. Like we are peeling back the layers of paint that include traumas and emotions and stressful time periods and toxin exposures, and all of that is the layers until we finally get to this true self, this unburdened, untriggered version of ourselves, which I don't think actually really exists. But the goal is to kind of like find this true self as you're doing this and eliminate heavy metals throughout this. So you probably notice mercury and aluminum seem to always be elevated for me. I have not had major eliminations of things like cadmium, lead, arsenic, or copper yet, and it's been a good 2 years. So just stay with it. Don't give up. Eventually it will happen. And then here's my most recent test, back into the slow oxidation with elevated calcium, but look how much lower it actually is this time, 138 compared to those other 2 times last year when they were like 250, 200. And so there's other stuff going on, but I just wanted to show you guys that it's not going to be normal to just look like it's getting better. I also wanted to show my lab work graph that I have here because I love data. So I've been tracking my labs. I think I'm missing one because I know that my eosinophils were this high at one point in time, but I can't find this lab work. But all the way back to 2018, because this was right after I had hepatitis A. Well, not right after, it was 8 months after I had hepatitis A. And my liver enzymes were still high. So that's when I really started tracking blood work. And I just coordinate the colors. Yellow means low, red means high, and these highlighted red numbers mean it's like right on the cusp. So I just look for patterns. You can see that WBCs have been low for a while. This is white blood cells. This can mean acute and chronic, or sorry, this can mean not acute, but chronic infections or chronic immune deficiency. And again, I was diagnosed with mast cell right around this time period. 2020. RBCs chronically high, which can be related to chronic stress because high potassium needs to be in the cell, not out of the cell. So if it's high on blood, that's an acute stress response. High eosinophils, which I always have, asthma, and needing vitamin C. Now, I have resonated with vitamin C on almost every single scan that I did, every single bioenergetic scan. Partially, I think because of the antioxidant need, also because it's a mast cell stabilizer, and it can help with copper toxicity too. The other ones that really you can see are almost always high are the monocytes and eosinophils. So you can see infections, parasites, asthma, histamine issues, mast cells. They have been titrating down until this last year. They actually went up just a little bit, but they're still on the downward from how elevated they were in the past. And you can just see there's some that fluctuate. Things are going to look differently as you go through this process. At the bottom here, I actually even started to track these are the scans, so I could just look at it in this format. And I highlighted in yellow everything that was repeated. So You can see there's a lot of things that keep coming up. Like I said, vitamin C, vitamin C, vitamin C. Um, the hormones that keep resonating, anything that was repeated, I've added or I highlighted in yellow. And it changes almost every single time. So you need to just look for the patterns, work with somebody who understands the complexity of the entire human body. And like, I definitely don't understand the full complexity, by the way, but at least I'm aware of everything affects everything else. And you really want to look for patterns because the patterns will give you clues, not just for where you need the physical support, but also what the triggers are, what the emotional stressors and the trauma patterns are, like that constant need to overwork and prove that I am good enough, prove that I am smart. That comes from this inherent sense of a core belief of not feeling good enough. Now, in my one on one with my coaches and mentors, that's what I work on because until I resolve that belief and that feeling in myself, it is going to accumulate as constantly needing to burn myself out, overworking, taking on more projects than I could handle, getting more degrees and certifications, spending money that I don't need to spend, people pleasing potentially, not listening to myself, not being able to feel my true sensations, being shut off from my body because I have to focus on work and being the best that I can be. And I shut off any messages that come that say, hey, you shouldn't be doing this. Hey, we're tired. Hey, we don't like how much you're working or how much you're pushing yourself. And you can see how that will eventually drive into a chronic illness state because over pushing, not resting, staying in a stress response, that is going to lead to all sorts of health issues down the line, from cortisol resistance to histamine issues and allergies and those electrolyte imbalances. And then, of course, we get to the copper, the calcium shell, the infections, and it just massively accumulates. If you want to hear more about my process on working with these complex illnesses, I have a master class called How to Heal Mast Cell Activation and Histamine Intolerance. Currently, it's only $25 and it's about 90 minutes, and it goes through what I call the 6 layers of mast cell. Basically, we start out with the top layer, which is we are in this chronic cell danger response. The body has detected that there is a threat and it is not stopping. We are chronically trying to address this stress, this threat. And then why? Why do we have this going on? Oh, it's because of chronic infection. Okay, but why? Why do we have chronic infections? Well, it's because our detox pathways, our drainage path. Okay, well, why are those messed up? And we go deeper and deeper and deeper till we get to the true roots of how we've gotten to this point. So if that interests you, please check out my website, thehealerrevolution.com, and check out that masterclass. Otherwise, you can find me on Instagram at Amanda Panacea, as well as the Healer Revolution. Thank you so much. Have a great day.